In this video, I'm going to show you why the cost of living in Springfield, Missouri will ease your financial pain while providing you with an opportunity to build the life you've always wanted for you and your family. My name's Tyler Fleetwood, and I specialize in helping people relocate to Springfield, Missouri. I've lived here my entire 37 years, and that makes me quite the expert on Springfield. Now, cost of living. If you're thinking about moving to Springfield, Missouri, you've probably heard people say that it's cheap to live here. But what does cheap actually mean? Are houses cheaper? What about groceries, electric bills, gas, healthcare, taxes? And most importantly, if you're moving here from somewhere else in the country, how much further is your money actually going to go? Well, I pulled the numbers. And instead of throwing a bunch of complicated stats at you, I'm going to make this really simple. Here's all you need to know. For these cost of living numbers, 100 represents the national average. So if something scores a 90, it costs roughly 10% less than the national average. If it scores 80, that's 20% less. Easy enough? Good. Because Springfield's overall cost of living is 89.7. So overall, the cost of living in Springfield is about 10.3% below the national average. But that number doesn't really tell the whole story. Some things here are dramatically cheaper than others. One of the biggest ones is probably the reason that a lot of people consider moving here in the first place, and that's housing. Springfield's housing index is 84.5. So that puts housing roughly 15.5% below the national average. Now think about what housing affects. It's not just the price of the house. It's the size of the mortgage that you have to qualify for. It's your down payment. How much house can you get for your money? And potentially how much income you need every single month just to keep a roof over your head. And this is where Springfield can start looking really different if you're coming from a more expensive part of the country. For example, Springfield's housing score of 84.5, let's compare that to the statewide housing index in California. California's is 189.5. New York is 172.3. Massachusetts, 217.5. And Hawaii is a whopping 300 and sometimes over. Now, that doesn't mean that every house in California costs exactly twice what it does in Springfield. That's not how these indexes work, but it gives you a really good picture of the difference in overall housing costs. And if you're selling a house in one of these more expensive markets and you're bringing that equity to Southwest Missouri, this is where the numbers start to get interesting. Housing isn't actually Springfield's biggest advantage. Utilities are. Hold up, I'm stupid. I forgot to add one of the most important stats, and that is median house price. In Springfield, it's $250,000. Springfield scores a 79.3 in utilities. So compared with the national average of 100, utility costs in this survey are about 21% lower. That includes all types of basic utility expenses that everybody has to deal with. Electricity, gas, water. I actually think that this is one of the more important numbers for somebody who's considering to move because you only buy your house once, but you're paying these bills every single month. So when you combine cheaper housing with lower utility costs, now you're talking about two of the biggest pieces of most household budgets being below the national average here in Springfield. Then you've got groceries. Springfield comes in at 92.2. That's roughly 8% below the national average. Not some unbelievable difference where you're going to walk into the grocery store and everything is going to be half price. You're still going to complain about the cost of groceries. I do too, but statistically, Springfield comes in below the national average. And that matters because unlike buying a house and other things, this is money that's leaving your bank account every single week to pay for food, so that matters. Next is transportation. Springfield scores 90.5. So transportation costs are roughly 10% below the national average. And there's another part of living in Springfield that isn't really captured by just looking at that number. Springfield is relatively easy of a city to get around. So depending on where you choose to live and work, you can have a pretty manageable daily commute. Now, obviously, if you live on one side of town and you work on the complete other side of town, you're going to spend more time in the car. But we're not talking about the type of commute that people moving here from Dallas or LA or Denver or some other major metro might be accustomed to. And that matters because cost isn't always just dollars. It's also time. Time is cost too, time in the car. Let's talk about healthcare. This is where Springfield gets a lot closer to the national average. Healthcare doesn't change a whole lot. The healthcare index is 98.4. So Springfield's only about 2% below the national average. Basically, I wouldn't move to Springfield expecting healthcare itself to suddenly become cheaper. Not going to happen. This isn't where the big cost of living advantage is in Springfield. It's not in healthcare. The big savings are much more concentrated in housing and utilities. But then we have what the study calls miscellaneous goods and services. Springfield scores a 94.3. Think about all those other things that you spend money on. Restaurants, clothing, personal services, entertainment, everyday purchases. Taken all together, Springfield comes in roughly 6% below the national average. So now zoom back out for a second and let's look at this. Housing, about 15% below average. Utilities, about 21% below average. Groceries, about 8% below. Transportation, about 9.5% below. Healthcare, pretty close to average. Goods and services, about 6% below. Put everything together, and that's how you get the cost of living index in Springfield, and it lands at 89.7 when you compare it to the national average of 100. And Missouri as a whole comes in even lower. Missouri's statewide cost of living index is 88.6, which tied for the 7th lowest cost of living among all states in 2026. But there's something that I need to clarify here. Lower cost of living does not mean everything in Missouri is dirt cheap, and it definitely doesn't mean that Missouri has no taxes. Missouri has taxes. We've got state income tax, sales tax, and property tax. And if somebody tells you Missouri is some kind of tax-free paradise, that's just not accurate. But because everything is a lot cheaper here and lower than the national average, you're paying less taxes because you're spending less money. There's another way to put all these numbers into perspective. MIT calculates what it calls a living wage for different parts of the country. For one adult with no children living in Springfield, in the Springfield metro area, MIT currently estimates a living wage for that person is $20.84 an hour. So that works out to be about 43 grand of required annual income before taxes for a living wage. Now, obviously, everybody's lifestyle is different. Somebody living alone is going to have a completely different set of expenses than somebody who's married with 3 kids. And somebody who's buying a 4,000 square foot house isn't going to have the same expenses as someone renting a 1-bedroom apartment. So don't hear these numbers and think,
well, Tyler said that I could live in Springfield for exactly this much money.
That's not what I'm saying. The point is to give you a baseline. And when you compare that baseline with other parts of the country, you can start to see why Springfield gets attention from people looking for a lower cost place to live. But I also want to make something clear. Cheap alone isn't a good enough reason to move somewhere. If a place is inexpensive, but you hate living there, who cares? Cost of living is only one piece of the puzzle. You still need to think about where you're going to live. What neighborhoods fit you? What your commute's going to look like on a regular basis? Whether you want to live in Springfield itself, or do you want to live somewhere on the outskirts like Nixa, Ozark, Republic, Willard, or some other surrounding community? What kind of house will your budget actually buy you? And what's your everyday life going to look like once you actually get here? That's really where the decision gets interesting. So if you're considering moving to Springfield or the surrounding area, I help people make that move all of the time. My contact information is in the description below. You can call me, text me, email me anytime. And if you want to learn more, make sure that you subscribe because I post videos each week and they're all about living in Springfield, Missouri.